Hello everybody, and welcome to the top 10 M21 cards for Commander and 2 honorable mentions. Doing this video because they've been releasing the previews for M21, the new set coming out, and it looks amazing. It looks amazing for multiple reasons. I'm a fan of almost all formats, Modern, Standard, especially Commander, and that's why I did this video, because this set is definitely Commander pushed. They've kind of been doing that in a lot of the sets lately. I think they finally realized that Commander is their big bread and butter. It's a huge swath of players from across the globe that love to just put 100 cards together and watch all the shenanigans happen. And this set does not seem to disappoint if that's what you like to do. So we're going to jump right into it right now. A quick note before we do. I'm not really rating these on a 1 to 10 scale in terms of what the most powerful will be, more along terms of what I think we'll see hit the board the most, be in more decks, just really kind of change the face of Commander in terms of ubiquity and just commonness within decks. So with that in mind, let's get started. Our first honorable mention is Rada, Heart of Keld. Rada looks like she'll be a really fun battle cruiser commander. Nothing really broken about her, but a lot of good value. She is a red and a green for a legendary elf warrior. Rada's been printed before. Her new incarnation shows that as long as it is your turn, she has first strike. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may play lands from the top of your library. Now we're talking. Now you're going to start getting some value generated with Rada, where you sort of have a Core Set Crew Fix type ability. As a matter of fact, it's not exactly a Core Set Crew Fix ability, because only you can look at the top card of your library. So it's better than Core Set Crew Fix because you're not giving away information to all the other opponents. But you can play lands right off the top. You're going to start being able to keep lands in your hand to play later if you need to. Basically not missing land drops. It will get you advantage. And then her final ability is for a red and a green, and she gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of lands you control. That's a really good ability on an aggressive commander, which she is, because you're going to be able to close out games once you start getting down 7-8 lands, especially if you have mana doublers, which there is in green, so that you can just kind of one-shot people or two-shot people with her as a commander. But I don't think that she's quite going to make it in terms of the top 10 list, but she's fun. Number 2 is Ghostly Pilferer. Ghostly Pilferer, again, not going to change the face of Commander as we know it, but has a number of relevant abilities that I think may make it into some decks. It's a colorless and a blue, so pretty cheap to cast, 2-drop, Spirit Rogue, not legendary, so not going to be a commander, but when it becomes untapped, you may pay 2 if you do draw a card. Not too bad. Early game, most likely people are still going to be dropping rocks, setting up their board state, so you'll find one of the 3 opponents will likely have nothing to block it, so you can get a card off that if you want to, if you need to draw. Whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than your hand, draw a card. Now this is some more meat and potatoes, because commanders are not being cast from hands. So whenever an opponent casts their commander, you're going to be able to draw a card. Add that on top of all of the graveyard decks that exist, flashback, things like that, and you're going to see a decent amount of card draw off a 2-drop in Commander. And then you can discard a card, and it can't be blocked this turn. So, I mean, that's not for nothing. That's good. There's no drawback to that. It's a decent card. I can see this being played in maybe some mono blue decks, definitely rogue pushed decks, but it's not going to really be a staple by any stretch. All right, the final honorable mention, and maybe this one should have made the list, because this is going to be in quite a few mono green decks, is Garruk's Uprising. Garruk's Uprising enters the battlefield. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. In Stompy decks, that's the only kind of decks you're going to want to have this in. You're likely going to have a big creature when this hits the board. If not, it still just continues to generate value, because it's a standing enchantment, which means that all creatures you control have trample. This is exactly what my friend's Hydra deck was missing, because he put together a great Hydra deck, fantastic battlecruiser. He actually won with it that game, but the problem that he was facing was that he just couldn't seem to push through chump blockers, and My friend was playing fairies, so he had a Bitter Blossom in play, a lot of little 1/1s that were just being thrown in front of these giant, like 22/22s, 18/18 Hydras, and if they would have had Trample, this game would have been over a long time before that. This is exactly what it's going to do. On top of all that, whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under control, you draw a card. So you draw a card from it entering itself. You have a standing effect that's super relevant, and then you're going to be continuing to draw cards with it. And mono green, that's exactly what you want to see. I put it on the honorable mentions because it's only going to be in mono green stompy builds, and I think that's a bit too narrow to kind of be hitting the criteria of changing the face of Commander, being, you know, more omnipresent. So we kind of put it in the honorable mentions, but it is by far the strongest of the honorable mentions. All right, moving on to number 10, we have Mangara the Diplomat. Finally, white is getting some draw. It has been a meme as of late that white is just the worst color in Commander and maybe just the worst color in Magic. It seems like the color pie was divided up and everybody got something good except for white, who got life gain. It just kind of seems like it was, you know, left by the wayside. It can't counter anything. Its removal is super overcosted, with the exception of Path to Exile and, you know, Swords to Plowshares. In the history of Magic, they got 2 really good removal cards. And there's just no draw, you know, big creatures, some angels, but it isn't really in white's color pie. Finally, we have Mangara the Diplomat. It's only number 10 because it's not insane draw, but in Commander there are going to be plenty of turns. Well, let's just read it off. 1 white and 3 colorless. Legendary creature, human cleric. It could be your commander if you want to, you know, really challenge yourself to a mono white build. It has lifelink itself, so not bad. 2/4. Whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, I don't know what else it would attack with, but if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, draw a card. So that's going to be quite often, I think, especially if you have planeswalkers. That kind of, you know, my Atraxa deck might want to see something like this, because it really, when people see planeswalkers, they freak out. They lose their minds. They need to kill that planeswalker because it's the threat you see, and all they see, they're blinded by it. It's just that ultimate. It might be 20 turns away, but oh my gosh, that card is going to ultimate at some point. I need to kill it right now. So this is a good blocker to throw in front of planeswalkers. 2/4 lifelink, and on top of that, if they try to go wider than you, you're going to be drawing a card and getting more ways to deal with them doing that. So I would say this is probably going to be good in Super Friends decks, if anywhere. The second ability is whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card. Now that's going to be the most relevant ability on this for sure, because, you know, there's Storm decks out there, there's really cheap kind of chaining value decks out there, but most decks, once they gear up, are going to be playing probably 2 spells a turn. Some of them just have haymakers where they play 1 a turn, 2 a turn, but, you know, of a 3-player rotation that you have to go through to get to your turn, likely one person is at least going to give you an extra card, and that's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. And I think that in terms of white, there are a lot of players that want to try building mono white. There are a lot of players that love the challenge of trying to, you know, put together a creature-based go white strategy. Mangara the Diplomat is going to be in all of those decks of the mono white builds, because frankly, white does not have a lot of draw engines, and this is finally one of them. Moving on to number 9, we have Discontinuity. Say that 3 times fast. Discontinuity is a really interesting spell. It is essentially time stop. I think that's what the first spell they ever printed that ended the turn was. This does that. It ends the turn. It's pretty simple, but it gets a lot cheaper if you do it on your turn. So I did a quick brainstorm of trying to find ways to break that, and it's really basically, once it's your turn, it costs 2 if you play it on your turn, because it reduces it by 4. So I'm sorry, it's 6 to cast. I said 7. So it's 6 to cast as an instant on somebody else's turn. If you cast it on your turn, it's 2. Essentially, it kind of just turns into a stifle, I think, in terms of realistically trying to break it. So you can do kind of interesting stuff like Last Chance. Take another turn after this one. You lose the game at the end of that turn. Well, now this is Time Walk if you have Discontinuity in your hand, because Last Chance suddenly allows you to take an extra turn. You start it, you can play through the whole turn, and as soon as it gets to the end of that turn, right before the end step, you just end the turn. Pay 2, turn's over, nothing else goes on the stack, moving on. So you lose a card out of your hand for it, but that's a decent way to change it, change the game up a bit. So Discontinuity, more than likely going to be played on opponents' turns when people start comboing off. Just hold it up, wait for somebody who's got that smirk at the table. They just drew something insane off the top, and when they start doing the combo and they show you the loop, well, we're just going to end this turn. That's just over. Everything's off the stack. As soon as this exiles, as soon as this resolves, the turn's over. Although be careful, because if it's a loop that they can do at instant speed for free, then they're just going to leave this on the stack and continue to do it. So you have to make sure it resolves. Doesn't have split second. All right. Number 8 is Peer into the Abyss. Now, this card is just terrifying to look at. I thought Mutate was the worst art that they had ever printed in Magic. But this is just, the equivalent of Willy Wonka's boat ride right on one card. Just horrifying, scarring to look at. Don't look at it too long, because when you peer into the abyss peers back. Anyway, this card says, target player draws cards equal to half the number of cards in their library and loses half their life, round up each time. Now, Commander, you have 40 life, and losing 20 life is not great, but it's probably a small price to pay when you can draw 20 cards. Well, probably more than 20 cards, considering that there's going to be around 80 in your library if you ramp it this quick. So somewhere between 20 and 30 cards are just going into your hand. If you have a Reliquary Tower, if you have a way to not have any maximum hand size, and I would recommend getting there before you play this, you are going to have so much card advantage that it's likely if you untap the next turn, you're going to be able to just counter everything they do, or just have haymakers all day long. Drawing half your library is never going to be a bad thing. And as the game goes on, losing half your life becomes less and less. If you're at 8 life, well, you only lose 4, but you're playing it pretty close to the cuff at that point. Anyway, so there is some cool things you can do if you want somebody else to draw, because it doesn't say you draw, it says target player draw. So you can make somebody else draw up half their library, and I think it would be pretty fun to do that in Nekusar, because that would probably just one-shot somebody. Unless their life total was insanely high, you force them to draw half their library, then they lose 40 life or so, and that's probably going to be it. That would be a fun way to kill somebody, I think. Style points for sure. But Peer into the Abyss, 9 times out of 10, is going to be used to draw half your own library, lose half your own life, and then you'll probably draw up something, hopefully, to make you gain some of that life back and start you on your way to winning the game. So I think we'll see that in quite a few mono-black builds and quite a few other decks as well. All right, number 7. This is a super fun one. Conspicuous Snoop. So Conspicuous Snoop is a goblin. As you can see, it's only a 2-drop. Double red, and if you haven't seen it already, Conspicuous Snoop is the enabler for a pretty fast infinite combo that can win the game, and I'll walk you through it as such. So Conspicuous Snoop is a 2-red goblin rogue that says you play with the top card of your library revealed. So everybody gets to see the cards that are coming down. You may cast goblin spells from the top of your library. So now it's like a Core Set Crucifix for goblins, and it's only 2. That's really good. So combo aside, this card's got a lot of playability in goblin decks. You have fetch lands in case a land's on top. You can kind of reshuffle, get something off the top, and just start generating value. Just busting out really cheap, really aggressive goblins to kind of take over the game. If somebody wipes the board, you can get Conspicuous Snoop back into play somehow. Just rebuild and start over. It's a fantastic card in its own right in Goblin decks, and I think it's going to go in almost every Goblin deck. But the combo is as such, and it involves just Goblins, which is very convenient. So, you get yourself a Goblin Recruiter. You can tutor it up however you want. Maybe it's in your opening hand. Maybe you're playing a green-red Goblin deck, which does exist, and you find your Goblin Recruiter. All right, well, Goblin Recruiter says that when it comes into play, when it enters the battlefield, you search your library for any number of Goblin cards, any number, and reveal those cards to all players. Shuffle your library, then put those cards on top of your library in any order. So the two you're going to find are Conspicuous Snoop and Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker, Captain Combo himself. They're not going to go in your hand. They're not going to go on the battlefield. They're going to go on the top of your library in just that order. First, Conspicuous Snoop, then Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker. So the next turn, you draw your Conspicuous Snoop, revealing Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker. When you play Conspicuous Snoop, it gets all the abilities of Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker, including haste. So you can tap it and create a token that's a copy of target non-legendary creature you control. That token has haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. Well, Conspicuous Snoop isn't legendary, so now it can copy itself. So you get a copy of Conspicuous Snoop with Kiki Jiki's ability, tap it, make a copy of Conspicuous Snoop, tap it, make a copy of Conspicuous Snoop. I'm not going to say this name anymore, I'm eventually going to mess it up. You get the idea. You make 1 billion trillion copies of Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker. And when you do, you might be asking, well, what am I going to do now? I have 1 billion tapped copies and 1 untapped copy, right? Well, that last untapped copy of Conspicuous Snoop with Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker's ability, you will tap not to copy Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker, but to copy Goblin Recruiter yet again. You forgot about him. He's still in play. And you're going to tutor up Mog Fanatic to the top of your library. So now, Conspicuous Snoop and all the copies of Conspicuous Snoop no longer have Kiki Jiki's ability. They have Mog Fanatic's ability. And you can sacrifice them all to deal 1 billion trillion damage however you like. I recommend doing it to your opponent's face. Alright, so that's the combo with Conspicuous Snoop. It's going to see a lot of play in Goblin decks. Only number 7 because as fast and efficient as it is, you can tutor it up with a green. There's a, I forget the name of the commander. It's a green-red Goblin. As efficient as it is, it's not going to go in every deck. It's not, universal. It's very much limited to Goblin decks. So if you do build a Goblin deck with it, I recommend putting that combo in, but only number 7 because of that. Alright. Number 6, we have Vito, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. Now, speaking of cards that have built-in combos, Vito is that. It is 2 and a black for a legendary vampire cleric. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. Now, where have we heard that before? If you play Commander a lot, you know there are 2 enchantments that go together all the time, and they instantly win the game if you deal any damage. And, well, we'll finish reading the card first. 3 and 2 black, creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. So this is a decent commander to just play on your own mono black. You could play with huge demons, huge drawback spells that just, create giant creatures. 6/6 flyers for 4, there's a lot of them out there. And you can give them lifelink so that not only are they dealing 6 damage, but they're gaining you 6 life. And then, because of his static effect, whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life, they're essentially dealing twice that much damage. So you attack with a 6/6 flyer, you give it lifelink, and then it deals 12 to the opponent. That's going to take people out of the game really quick. And it's a cheap commander, so you can keep casting it and keep doing that kind of stuff. So I think that you're going to see a few of these decks floating around out there. Probably not tier 1, not competitive, but really fun. However, the thing that's going to make it really quick to end games is just adding Exquisite Blood. Because whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life, coupled with whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life, means all you have to do is deal 1 point of damage or make somebody lose 1 point of life, and then you're going to create a loop that goes back and forth, and you can direct it. Target opponent loses that much life. Yeah, so you can choose new targets once you drain somebody else out of the game. Now this person's drained out of the game. Now this person's drained out of the game. And even though you can't stop that loop once it starts, it will stop itself once there's no more opponents and you win the game. So it's pretty fun and pretty efficient to do. Exquisite Blood plus Vito, Thorn of the Dusk Rose is going to be something that wins games in the future, and that is why it earned our number 6 slot. Alright, moving on from there, we have Fiery Emancipation. What can we say about this card? It's insane. They have printed not 1, but 2 now, cards that say, if an X does X, triple that amount. The first one was just back in Theros, I think. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is another triple card out there, but I think these are the first 2 that I have seen in my experience. That giant green creature tripled the amount of mana that any of your sources would produce. Any mana producing source would produce. It produces triple that much instead. Fiery Emancipation, riding on those coattails, but for 1 less, only 6, says that if a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to that permanent or player instead. Red is getting a lot of goodies in this set, and this is definitely one of them. You know, your creatures are now 3 times as powerful on the front end. Your burn spells, if you're running any, there's not a lot that you'd really want to run, but maybe if you're building around this, there is, are now dealing 3 times as much damage. There's all kinds of ideas that you can put into this, and here's some of the ones that I want to try out. You could build a Spells Matter deck with this. You know, put a bunch of burn spells in there, and all of a sudden Gutter Snipe is doing 6 damage per spell to each opponent. That is nothing to sneeze at, and that's going to end the game really quick. You know, you do a lightning bolt to somebody's face, well, that's 9 damage, and then, you know what, Gutter Snipe's going to follow up with an additional 6. So 15 damage off 1 red with a Gutter Snipe in play, as long as you have Fiery Emancipation in play as well. You're going to be able to just rip people's life totals to shreds. The rack effects, if you want to put together an attrition deck where you're just forcing everyone to discard, maybe with Liliana and a few other spells, keeping their hands low is a really good way. Well, the rack's not going to ping away with them 3 at a time. The rack's going to ping away at them 9 at a time if you keep them hellbent. Yeah, it doesn't say red, right? If you control, yeah, if a source you control, it doesn't have to be a red source. So that's pretty good. Rack effects would work. Of course, Perforos, you know, a staple of many, many red decks. Every creature that enters the battlefield is going to be doing not 2 to each opponent, but 6 to each opponent. And if you're playing a token deck, a mono red deck, a goblins deck, you're going to be doing 6 over and over and over, many times a turn. It's going to get out of control. And then, hey, swing with Perforos for 18 damage if you can get it online. Not too shabby. The other thing that I wanted to say is that it triples the amount of damage your commander deals. So I always say 7's the magic number when it comes to commanders for commander damage, because that is where you go from having 4 swings to just 3 swings. The next step up from that is you have to have 11 power, in order to cut it down to just 2 swings with your commander. Well, now 7 is the super magic number with Fiery Emancipation, because cards like Zergo just one-shot people. That's right, play Fiery Emancipation first, then you drop Zergo, and 7, 14, 21, all in one swing. We just took you out of the game. That's going to happen really quick, and I think if you're building Zergo, this is going to be an auto-include, because holy moly is that going to make this deck strong. I had a friend who played this for a while, and very aggressively, 1v1, it was super hard to beat. However, there is something jankier than that I really can't wait to try with Fiery Emancipation, and that is Hostility. Oh my goodness. Imagine getting a Hostility out with Fiery Emancipation in play and casting just a single lightning bolt. Well, you're not going to deal 9 damage to them, because it says that if a spell you control would deal damage to an opponent, prevent that damage, and create a 3/1 red elemental shaman creature token with haste for each 1 damage prevented this way. So now you are getting 9 3/1s, and if my math is correct, that's 9, 18, that's a lot of damage. You're going to be dealing with 9 3/1 creatures that are going to be putting damage anywhere across the board, and it's going to be out of control, and that's just with 1 single lightning bolt. So I would say that's a really fun thing that I want to try to do. All right, moving on. Fiery Emancipation to wrap up. Liliana's Standard Bearer. This card isn't super sexy. There's not a lot of combos with it, but it's just going to see a ton of play in mono black and black X decks because it's just a really great rate for a card. It's got flash, it's a 3/1, it can chump, and the time that it's going to hit the board the most is post board wipe. And let's just face it, board wipes are a fact of life when it comes to Commander. You want to play all your guys, you want to play all your monsters, and you want to swarm the board, and for that reason, if you're smart, you pack board wipes and you hit reset and you start over because you're not always going to be the one in the lead. Well, Liliana's standard bearer knows that, and he's going to keep just three mana up, and that's pretty cheap, to realize that if your board does get swept, you can flash it in and draw that many cards, and all of a sudden you're not sitting so bad. Everybody else has got 2-3 cards in hand, while you've just drawn 3 or 4. So, and you have a 3/1 in play. You've broken that synergy. It's not a double black, it's only a single black, so like I said, not super sexy, but I think you're going to see it in a lot of decks, and that is why it's earned our number 4 spot. I mean, you can also do token strategies yourself with sack outlets, and just generate a ton of value that way. So there's a lot of things you can do with it. Very malleable card. All right, we're starting to get into the really juicy cards now. Number 3 is Teferi, Master of Time. A lot of people, I don't think, realize how strong this card is just by looking at it. It's the first Planeswalker we've ever seen that allows you to tick up or tick down on an opponent's turn as well as your own turn. Unless you count one of the Teferis that ultimates that lets you do that. This one just has that built in. And that is quite insane with a draw card ability. People were talking about this in regular 1v1 formats saying, don't look at it as a +1, look at it as a +2 because you're going to be, plussing it to 4 on your turn and then plussing it to 5 on your opponent's turn. Well, in Commander, that's a +4. You're going to be plussing it on your turn, then the person to your right, then the person your left, then the person across to you, then the person on your right. So by the time it gets back to you, Teferi's gone from the turn you dropped it on 3, and then on your turn to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You get to ultimate it, if you protect it for that many turns, before your third cycle back to yourself. That's a really quick rate in order to take 2 extra turns, and it will still survive when you do that, if you do it on your turn, which is really, really strong. On top of that, you're filtering for free every turn, which is going to fix your hand to an insane degree. In control decks, you're going to see this quite a bit. In Super Friends decks, I'm definitely going to be trying it in my Atraxa, which is my favorite commander. And then, it's -3. Not to sneeze at, target creature you don't control phases out. I kind of wish it said just target creature phases out so that you could save one of your own things from board wipes and stuff like that, but I'm not going to complain. It's flavorful, it's got everything you want in Teferi. I'm not a big fan of Teferi from the 3-drop perspective, but I love this card. This card has redeemed Teferi in my eyes. It's not as prohibitive as 3-drop Teferi is and stops people from playing. It just helps you out, and I think that that is really good and won't make the games unfun. Will just make them super strong on your end, and get ready to have everybody try to attack this Teferi, because when they realize how much value you're generating, and it is draw and discard. It's not pure value, but your hand's going to be very, very strong. All right, number 2. Wow, this card is wild, and it took me a long time to get it down to number 2 from number 1. Double Vision, 2 red, 3 colorless. I didn't lie when I said that red was getting a lot of goodies. For just 5, you get a standing enchantment that says whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell each turn, not on your turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Holy moly, is this card insane. I mean, right off the bat, the first thing that comes to mind, extra turn cards. You drop this, comes back to your turn. Why not have a time stretch on turn 5 or 6? That is probably going to put you so far ahead that you're going to be archenemy, if not just win the game outright. But that doesn't even stop you from doing things like playing Brainstorm on your opponent's turn and doubling it up, drawing 6 cards, putting 4 back on top. You can do things like, instant speed draw spells. You can do things like Chaos Warp, hitting 2 of their permanents on their turn. Any of your instants are going to be doubled up. That enchantment has got to go the second it hits. Speaking of hits, let's look at some of the greatest hits of spells. Torment of Hailfire. Usually, you get up to about, 15, 16 mana. You sink it all into this thing. You just win the game. People don't have enough permanents to deal with the X being that big on Torment of Hailfire. Well, now, you only have to have half as much mana, because this is going to double your Torment of Hailfire. And I don't even want to show you this next card. Because I don't want to imagine a world where this happens. But if anybody expropriates with double vision in play, what are you doing? You don't have a heart. You don't have a soul if you would play expropriate at all, really. But to double that card? That's so gross. I mean, first off, your time stretch. You're taking 2 extra turns. But you're also getting, at the very least, if they're smart, 2 of the best permanents from every player. Oh man. Evil. Won't see me doing it. Nope. Yes. Alright, that's double vision. Man, that card is going to be strong. Not even a big fan of red. I like Atraxa, I like Witchmaw. I leave red out. But when I see this card, that's going to be one of the first things I build around in my Nicol Bolas deck. Whew. That is strong, but it's not the strongest. Our number 1 card. I thought long and hard about this. You might disagree. Tell me in the comments if you do. You probably do. Teferi's Ageless Insight. Whew. Man. Look at that. If you would draw a card, except the first one you draw, in each of your draw steps, right? Just in your draw steps. Not each turn. Not if you would draw a card except the first one you draw each turn. Just your draw step. Draw 2 cards instead. That's wild. That is wild. It's not going to go in every deck. Because let's face it doesn't do anything when it hits. But if your deck draws cards, your deck is out of control right now. It's very similar to double vision, because it's a double drawing vision that you now have. It's a double dragon. And Brainstorm. Let's just do Brainstorm for instance, right? You play Brainstorm on your turn, on your opponent's turn, doesn't matter. You're drawing 6 cards. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. I did a little research. It's not any instance of draw. If a spell would make you draw an additional, no. Each draw, you draw 1 at a time, is now doubled. You draw 6 cards, you put 2 back on top, you've netted 4 cards of 6 deep for 1 blue. It's bonkers. Hey, remember this card? A few people play it now and then. Now, it's twice as good. Every time somebody doesn't pay the 1, you're drawing 2 cards. Make sure you have no maximum hand size when this hits the board, because holy moly, this card is broken. Let's look at some commanders that can abuse this. Tishana, Voice of Thunder, drawing for each creature you control. No, you're drawing 2 for each creature you control. Hey, Nin the Pain Artist, draw X? Nah, draw 2 times X for shooting your own creature. And you can still shoot somebody else's creature too, because they're never going to be drawing as much as you do. You're always going to have the most advantage. Also, if you're playing Nin, play Narset. Don't let him draw. Alright, that's my little secret. It's really mean. It's a mean thing to do. That's what I would do. How about Damia? At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have fewer than 7 cards in hand, draw cards equal to the difference. Well, you lock that in. If I have 4 cards in hand, I've drawn 3. Now, I'm drawing 6. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Even Kenrith, even old Kenny, is going to be taking advantage of this card. I definitely think Teferi's Ageless Insight, which is only selling, like, I'm looking at a pre-order, it's like $1.43. Maybe I'm overvaluing it. It seems insane to me. Doubling all your draw except the first one in your turn. That's just wild. So good. All right, that's our list. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. This is my first video that I've done in a long while. I would ask you to like, and I would ask you to subscribe. And I'm hoping I can put more of these out for you guys if you like them. If not, let me know why you didn't like them. I'll try to make them better. I'm here for you. You're the audience. Play to the audience. But yeah, I'm really excited for this set. I'm really excited for it, and I hope you guys are too. And I hope that we can do some form of pre-release for it. I know times are crazy right now, but if not, we can't do the pre-release. We got a lot of Commander that we can play with these cards. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and I will see you later.